A Song for Silas by Laurie Wick. Chapter 13. Grant was starved for news from town and fired many questions at Silas and Amy during supper, much to the relief of both. Time had not allowed them to sit long on the road, and they were still both in deep thought over their unfinished conversation. "Amy," Silas had said, "I don't have answers for you right now. I need to think and pray before I can advise you, and I'm not even sure I should do that. You may need to work this out for yourself, but I'm glad you told me, and when you want to talk, you know I'm here." Amy had thanked him. The regret and concern she had seen in his eyes had somehow given her a small measure of peace. She didn't feel quite so alone in her pain. Amy had just finished the dishes when Grant called her to his room. Silas had helped him into bed after supper, then he went out for a final check on the cows. Grant asked Amy to play for a while, and Silas found her seated at the piano and playing softly when he returned. Moving quietly, Silas settled onto the couch and let the music flow over him. Amy was in profile to him as she played, and Silas watched with the eye of a fellow musician. As always, her style and grace were beyond compare. Her hands moved with confidence as she played from memory. Silas recognized the music, noticing she went from hymns to a more difficult piece that had a soothing, almost haunting melody. His head fell back to rest on the couch, and as his eyes slid closed, he began to reflect on the day. The Randalls wanted Amy to come and live with them. What a mess! The conversation Silas had overheard at the wagon now made complete sense. Judging from the words Evan had directed at Silas, he seemed very confident Amy would come as soon as Grant was on his feet. Silas had to admit to himself his first reaction to the idea was negative, but who was he to judge? Maybe God wanted Amy living in town. Amy, as far as he could see, had been working hard all her life to balance her affection between her father and uncle, a position she had not asked for, but one which had been thrust upon her at birth. Judging from the relationships Amy had with both men, it was obvious she was doing an excellent job. Silas felt a bit of anger that she should now be forced into making this kind of decision. Possibly some of the anger could better be termed frustration at having no advice to give this young woman. She held a special place in his heart, as a young sister would. His feelings must have shown on his face because he opened his eyes when the music stopped to find Amy watching him. "The music is supposed to relax you, Si, not make you frown." She smiled at him as she spoke, but her eyes were questioning. "It wasn't the music, Amy, I can assure you. Nothing has changed in 4 years. You still play like an angel." "Just exactly how many angels have you heard play?" Amy's voice was a bit mocking. Silas gave her a stern look. "I can see there are other things that haven't changed in 4 years. We've talked about this before. When someone compliments your playing, you thank them, not belittle your work with some light remark." "But Silas, that's just it. It's not work. My playing has always come so easily that I feel guilty accepting compliments." "It's still a gift from God, and to make light of it is wrong." The two sat regarding each other in stubborn silence for some moments. Amy spoke first. "Were you frowning over what I told you in the wagon?" Amy was sure her dad was asleep, so she did not drop her voice. Silas's voice was serious as he answered, "It hasn't been far from my thoughts since you told me. Would you like to talk about it?" Gone was the big brother who scolded her for a flip response to his compliment. In fact, Silas's voice was so tender that Amy nearly cried. She spoke slowly, and Silas listened without interruption. "A few weeks before my dad's fall, Uncle Evan approached me about coming into town to live with them. Somehow he has the impression I'm unhappy out here on the farm. Nothing could be farther from the truth." She paused, but Silas kept quiet. "Silas, had you heard I'd been engaged?" At his nod, she continued, "The boy I was engaged to is from town, and, well, Uncle Evan felt I would meet someone else if I lived there. So I wanted to talk with my dad. But I'm afraid he'll think I'm staying here out of some sort of obligation, and it wouldn't be the truth. I don't want to move into town, but I have no idea how to tell my uncle without hurting him or making him think Dad is forcing me to stay. I know my uncle never meant to be mean, but he said the most eligible boys were from town, and they would naturally want a wife from town. Deborah Wheeler lives in town. She's Thomas Blaine's new fiancée, and Uncle Evan thinks if I had been from town, Thomas would not have broken up with me. I didn't tell my uncle that I planned to never marry, but I couldn't help but feel a little hurt when he implied I wasn't good enough. I also know my uncle has never accepted Christ, and I'm afraid that if the bond between us is broken, he'll never come to know the Lord. Even in the light of this man's need for salvation, Silas was working hard at keeping a normal expression on his face as rage boiled within him. How dare her uncle make Amy feel as though she were not good enough? Thomas Blaine was a fool and obviously didn't deserve her. Silas would have laughed if he'd known how closely his thoughts echoed those of Evan Randall, a man he was having more and more trouble liking all the time. I know you can't tell me what to do, but thank you for listening, Silas. Silas's heart nearly broke at the forlorn look on her face. You're right, sweetheart, I can't tell you what to do, but I will say this. I think you're doing your father a great injustice. Part of the hurt you're feeling is because you want to talk to him. I know he'll listen and help you. And you know it too. Even with a broken leg, he's still the father who loves you with all his heart. He'll not let you down. Amy sat and stared at Silas as the truth of his words came through to her. How many times had she asked God for help while possibly missing how close it had been all the time? Thank you, Silas. Amy spoke the words softly and moved to her bedroom. Silas blew out the lanterns and headed for his own room. Grant lay quietly in his bed, listening as Silas climbed the stairs to the attic. He stared at the ceiling, feeling old beyond his years and helpless. He wanted to pray, but didn't even know where to begin. After all he'd overheard tonight from the living room, the pain in his heart overpowered the pain in his leg. He felt a single tear slide down his temple, his heart crying out to God as it had so many times past. Please, God, let your will for Amy be as special as she is. You got the note? I got it. The voice answering was sharp with anxiety. What's it say? We got another job to do? Patience, man. This barn's been standing alone for years. A light burning in here, and we're as good as found out. The testy man's companion peered out into the ebony night. There didn't appear to be anyone about, but one couldn't be too careful. Suddenly, the attention of both men was drawn upward by the sound of fluttering wings. Bats, no doubt. Each man reacted in his own way. One suppressed a shiver, the other pulled his hat a bit closer about his ears and whispered, Well, if we can't read it here, let's get back to town. The man was not about to admit his fear, but he nearly sagged with relief when his partner moved toward the horses. As always, the two were plagued by the identity of their employer, or rather the lack thereof. When at first their services had been employed, the jobs were nondescript, and even though the margin was narrow, within the confines of the law. But all this had changed a number of weeks back, when they were asked to rob a farmhouse. The amount taken was very small, but it became obvious that they were being tested when the next farm robbery had yielded a substantially larger amount. Even as the men climbed stairs at the back of the largest saloon in town and entered their room, each harbored a small hope within his breast that this note would give some clue as to the identity of the mysterious, darkly cloaked figure with whom they were doing business.